The warm glow of sunset filtered through the tall windows of the Mason family's small apartment in East Detroit. 14-year-old Jasmine sat at their old upright piano, her fingers dancing across the worn ivory keys. The instrument wasn't much to look at, scratched mahogany with a few chipped keys, but in Jasmine's hands, it sang like something worth 10 times its value. "That sounds beautiful." "Honey?" Her mother Denise called from the kitchen where she was heating up dinner after her first job of the day. In 2 hours, she'd head out again for her night shift at the hospital. "But don't you have homework to finish?" Jasmine nodded without stopping her practice. "Almost done with the Chopin piece, Mom. 5 more minutes?" Denise smiled and shook her head, knowing full well that 5 minutes in piano time usually meant 30. But she couldn't bring herself to interrupt. Not when her daughter played like that, like her soul was speaking through her fingertips. The phone rang, cutting through the melody. Jasmine's hands froze over the keys as her mother answered. "Hello? Yes, this is Denise Mason." There was a pause. "Ms. Rivera?" "Yes, of course." Jasmine perked up at the mention of her piano teacher's name. Ms. Rivera had been teaching her for 6 years now, ever since discovering Jasmine playing on the community center piano when she was 8. Unlike most kids who needed to be bribed to practice, Jasmine had to be pulled away from the piano. "A performance? At the Grand Meridian?" Her mother's voice rose with surprise. That's quite an opportunity." Jasmine swiveled on the bench, her heart suddenly racing. The Grand Meridian was the fanciest hotel in Detroit. Famous people stayed there. Rich people. "Yes, she's right here. Would you like to speak with her?" Her mother held out the phone, her eyes wide with excitement. With slightly trembling hands, Jasmine took the receiver. "Hello?" "Jasmine. It's Miss Rivera." Her teacher's voice bubbled with enthusiasm. "I've got news that might change everything for you." "What kind of news?" Jasmine asked, tucking her legs underneath her on the piano bench. "I've been asked to recommend one student to perform at the Arts Forward fundraiser this Friday at the Grand Meridian. These are some of the wealthiest donors in the city, people who fund scholarships and arts programs." Ms. Rivera paused for effect. "I gave them your name." Jasmine's free hand flew to her mouth. "Me? But I'm the most talented young pianist I've ever taught," Ms. Rivera finished firmly. "This is a chance to be heard by people who matter in the music world, Jasmine. People who could help with your dream of music school." After the call ended, Jasmine sat in stunned silence while her mother peppered her with questions. The Arts Forward fundraiser was an annual event where Detroit's elite gathered to support arts education in underprivileged communities. It was exactly the kind of event that had funded the community center where Jasmine had first discovered her love for piano. "But what will I wear?" Jasmine suddenly asked, looking down at her faded jeans. "I don't have anything nice enough for the Grand Meridian." Her mother sat beside her on the piano bench. "We'll figure it out. Maybe we can alter my blue dress from Cousin Tanya's wedding. And what will I play? Chopin? Bach? Or something more modern?" Panic began to set in as Jasmine realized she had only 3 days to prepare. "Whatever you choose, you'll play it beautifully," her mother assured her, though Jasmine could see worry lines creasing her forehead too. The next 3 days passed in a blur. Jasmine practiced until her fingers ached, cycling through her repertoire again and again. Ms. Rivera came over on her day off to help her select the perfect piece, Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. Difficult but breathtaking when played well. "It's ambitious," Ms. Rivera had warned, "but you've been working on it for months and it showcases your technical skill and emotional range. If you nail this, they'll remember you." Meanwhile, Denise worked magic with needle and thread, taking in her old dress to fit Jasmine's smaller frame. Their neighbor, Mrs. Washington, hearing about the big opportunity, lent Jasmine a simple pearl necklace, for luck, child. On Friday evening, as the sun began to set over Detroit's skyline, Jasmine and her mother boarded the city bus heading downtown. The dress, now a perfect fit, was wrapped in a plastic garment bag across Jasmine's lap. Her sheet music was tucked safely in her backpack. "Remember when we couldn't even afford piano lessons?" Denise said softly. "And now look at you playing at the Grand Meridian." Jasmine squeezed her mother's hand. Those early days had been tough. After Jasmine's father left when she was 6, money had been tight. Denise had worked multiple jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. Piano lessons were an impossible luxury until Ms. Rivera offered to teach Jasmine for a reduced fee. Convinced of her natural talent, I wouldn't be going anywhere without you. Mom, Jasmine whispered. As the bus pulled up to the stop nearest the hotel, Jasmine felt her stomach tighten with nerves. The Grand Meridian towered above them, all gleaming glass and polished stone. Doormen in crisp uniforms stood at attention beneath a massive awning. Deep breaths, Denise reminded her as they walked toward the entrance. You've earned your place here tonight. The lobby was a world away from their apartment. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, people in clothing that probably cost more than their rent. Jasmine clutched her garment bag tighter, suddenly feeling very small. A woman with a clipboard and an earpiece approached them. Can I help you? We're here for the Arts Forward fundraiser, Denise explained. My daughter is performing tonight. Jasmine Mason? The woman checked her list, then nodded. Yes, the student pianist. She looked Jasmine up and down with an expression Jasmine couldn't quite read. The performer's preparation area is this way. Mom can come too. They followed her through the lobby and down a hallway to a small conference room that had been converted into a staging area. A few other performers were already there. A string quartet of college students and an older gentleman tuning a violin. You can change in the restroom down the hall, the coordinator told them. Sound check in 20 minutes, performance in about an hour and a half. The donors will have dinner first, then the program begins. After she left, Jasmine changed into her dress, her hands shaking slightly as she fastened the buttons. When she emerged, her mother gasped. You look beautiful, Denise said, adjusting the pearl necklace around Jasmine's neck. Like a real concert pianist. The sound check went smoothly. The piano was a magnificent Steinway Grand, its tone richer and more resonant than anything Jasmine had ever played. She ran her fingers lovingly over the keys, playing a few measures of the Chopin piece to get a feel for the instrument. That's quite impressive for someone your age, the sound technician commented. How long have you been playing? Since I was 8, Jasmine replied, still marveling at the piano. But never on something this nice. As the time for the event drew closer, the backstage area became busier. Volunteers bustled about, checking details. Ms. Rivera arrived, elegant in a simple black dress. There's my star pupil, she exclaimed, hugging Jasmine. How are you feeling? Terrified, Jasmine admitted. What if I mess up? What if they don't like it? They will be moved by your playing, Ms. Rivera said confidently. But remember, you're not playing for their approval. You're playing because music lives in your soul, and tonight you get to share that with them. Peeking through the curtains, Jasmine could see the ballroom filling with guests, women in glittering gowns, men in tuxedos, champagne flutes in hand as they mingled. These people lived in a different world from hers, a world of wealth and influence she could barely imagine. You'll go on after the welcome speech and the string quartet, the event coordinator explained. About 10 minutes for your piece, then you're done. Jasmine nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. Her mother stood nearby, pride and worry mingling on her face. From the ballroom, they could hear the clink of silverware and the murmur of conversation. Then came the sound of someone tapping on a microphone, followed by a woman's voice welcoming everyone to the 7th annual Arts Forward fundraiser. Tonight, we celebrate the power of arts education to transform lives, the woman said. Your generous donations help bring music, dance, and visual arts to children who might otherwise never experience them. There was polite applause. Jasmine took deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. Our first performance tonight comes from some remarkable talent right here in Detroit, the announcer continued. Please welcome the Lakeside String Quartet, students from Wayne State University's music program. As the quartet took the stage, Jasmine peeked out at the audience again. Her gaze landed on a table near the front, where a man in an expensive suit was checking his phone, looking utterly bored. Something about his dismissive attitude made her stomach clench even tighter. You're on in 5, the coordinator whispered, jolting Jasmine back to the present. The string quartet finished their piece to enthusiastic applause. As they exited, one of the violinists smiled encouragingly at Jasmine. Good luck, kid, he whispered. That's a tough crowd, but they'll love you. The announcer returned to the microphone. Next, we have a special treat. As many of you know, your donations support programs that discover and nurture young talent in our city's underserved communities. Tonight, we're delighted to present one such talent, 14-year-old Jasmine Mason, a student in our community piano program. This was it. Jasmine looked at her mother and Ms. Rivera, who both nodded encouragingly. Remember why you play, Ms. Rivera whispered. Taking one last deep breath, Jasmine stepped toward the stage, her heart pounding in her chest but her head held high. She was about to face the wealthiest, most influential people in Detroit, people who could open doors she hadn't even dreamed of, with nothing but her music and her courage. Jasmine stood at the edge of the stage, momentarily frozen as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel stretched before her like an ocean of wealth, crystal chandeliers casting golden light over tables adorned with fresh flowers and fine china. Men in tailored suits and women draped in designer dresses watched with polite, if somewhat disinterested, expressions as the charity case was introduced. She smoothed down the front of her mother's altered blue dress and touched the borrowed pearl necklace for luck. From the wings, she could see her mother giving her an encouraging thumbs up, mouthing the words, "You've got this." The walk to the grand piano seemed to take forever. Jasmine felt every step, heard every whisper. As she passed the front tables, she caught snippets of conversation that weren't meant for her ears. "This should be interesting," a woman in diamonds murmured to her. "Companion, let's hope it's mercifully brief," came the reply. But it was the man at table 3 who spoke loudly enough for many to hear. Jasmine recognized him as the same bored-looking man she'd spotted earlier. With perfectly styled silver hair and a custom suit that probably cost more than her family's rent for a year, he exuded the confidence of someone used to being the most important person in any room. "Remind me why we're subjected to these amateur performances," he said, not bothering to lower his voice as Jasmine approached. "I wrote a check for $50,000. That should have bought me a professional pianist, not some kid from the projects." His tablemates shifted uncomfortably, a few shooting apologetic glances in Jasmine's direction. One woman placed a hand on his arm in a gentle attempt to quiet him, but he shrugged it off. "Come on, Richard," she whispered. "She can hear you." The man, Richard, glanced at Jasmine with cold eyes. Well, perhaps she needs to hear it. False praise doesn't do anyone any favors in the real world. Jasmine's steps faltered. She'd faced doubters before. Classmates who teased her for spending lunch breaks practicing piano instead of hanging out. Neighbors who said music was a waste of time for a girl from their neighborhood, but never so blatantly, and never from someone with so much power. She recognized the man now from a newspaper article Ms. Rivera had shown her class. Richard Whitfield, tech entrepreneur and venture capitalist. He'd made his first million before turning 30, and had since multiplied that many times over. His foundation donated generously to arts causes, which apparently gave him the right, in his mind, to speak however he pleased. Jasmine reached the piano bench and sat down, trying to control her trembling hands. The microphone had been positioned to catch the event host's introduction, which meant it had also broadcast Whitfield's comments to the entire room. An uncomfortable silence had fallen over the crowd. From her seat at the piano, Jasmine could see her mother's face had hardened. A look she knew well, the expression Denise wore when fighting battles on her daughter's behalf. Ms. Rivera looked equally upset, whispering urgently to one of the event organizers. Jasmine placed her hands on the keys, then hesitated. The weight of Whitfield's words pressed down on her shoulders. Maybe he was right. Maybe she didn't belong here, in this glittering world of old money and new technology. Maybe this whole thing was just rich people patting themselves on the back for their charity work. The pause stretched uncomfortably long. People began to shift in their seats. Someone coughed. Another person whispered loudly enough for Jasmine to hear. "See?" The poor thing's got stage fright. It was that whisper, the pity in it, that finally cut through Jasmine's paralysis. She didn't want anyone's pity. She wanted their respect, and the only way to get that was through her music. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and pictured herself back in the community center where she'd first fallen in love with the piano. She remembered the feeling of discovering that her hands could create something beautiful, something that transcended the peeling paint on the walls and the second-hand clothes on her back. Just as she was about to begin playing, Whitfield's voice cut through the silence again. "I hope someone's timing this. Some of us have actual business to discuss after the entertainment portion." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. The event host stepped forward, clearly prepared to say something, but Jasmine had had enough of waiting. Her fingers struck the first powerful chords of Chopin's ballad. Not tentatively, not apologetically, but with purpose. The notes rang out across the ballroom, silencing every whisper, every laugh, every doubting thought. But within seconds, disaster struck. Her fingers slipped on the unfamiliar keys, producing a jarring discord that made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She heard a snicker from Whitfield's table and nearly stopped altogether. In that moment of near defeat, Jasmine caught sight of her mother standing in the wings. Denise wasn't looking embarrassed or worried. She was standing tall, her expression fierce with pride and determination, as if willing her daughter to continue. Jasmine took another breath and started again from the beginning. This time she didn't think about the audience or Richard Whitfield or the $50,000 check he'd written. She thought only about the music, about the countless hours she'd spent practicing this piece in their small apartment, about the way it made her feel when she played it right, like she was flying, like there were no limits to what she could do. The opening notes flowed more smoothly this time, building in intensity as the piece progressed. Jasmine's initial nervousness melted away as she lost herself in the familiar patterns, her fingers finding their way through the complex passages that had once seemed impossible. Still, she could sense Whitfield's dismissive presence, his judgment hanging over her like a cloud. As she reached a particularly challenging section, she dared to glance in his direction. He wasn't even watching her. Instead, he was checking his phone under the table, scrolling through messages as if her performance was background noise, unworthy of his attention. Something hardened inside Jasmine then. Not anger exactly, but resolve. She attacked the next passage with renewed vigor, her fingers flying across the keys with precision and passion. The notes seemed to pour from some deep well inside her, each one clear and purposeful. Gradually, she became aware that the room had changed. The polite, distant attention of the audience had transformed into something else, a focused silence, the kind that happens when people are truly listening. Even the waitstaff had paused in their duties, standing motionless at the edges of the room. Only Whitfield remained unaffected, still absorbed in his phone. But Jasmine no longer cared. She was playing for everyone else now. For her mother, who worked 2 jobs to support her dreams. For Ms. Rivera, who believed in her talent. For the kids back in her neighborhood, who'd never had the chance to set foot in a place like the Grand Meridian. As she reached the piece's emotional climax, Jasmine poured everything she had into the music. All her hopes, all her fears, all the times she'd felt not good enough, not rich enough, not white enough for the classical music world. The notes soared and crashed like waves, filling every corner of the ballroom. And then, just as she transitioned into a quieter passage, she noticed movement at Whitfield's table. He had finally put down his phone and was looking at her, his expression unreadable. Jasmine didn't falter this time. She held his gaze for a moment before returning her focus to the piano. Whatever he thought of her didn't matter anymore. She knew her worth now. The final minutes of the piece were among the most challenging, requiring both technical precision and emotional depth. Jasmine navigated them with growing confidence, each note exactly where it needed to be. As she approached the conclusion, she could feel the audience collectively holding their breath, waiting to see if this young girl from East Detroit could possibly bring this ambitious piece home. The final chords resonated through the ballroom, powerful and definitive. Jasmine held the last note, letting it hang in the air for just the right amount of time before lifting her hands from the keys. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Jasmine sat perfectly still, her eyes closed, still caught in the spell of the music. Then she heard it, a single pair of hands starting to clap, then another and another until the applause swelled to fill the entire room. She opened her eyes to find the audience on their feet. Even the waitstaff were applauding, protocol forgotten in the wake of what they'd just witnessed. In the wings, her mother was wiping tears from her cheeks while Ms. Rivera beamed with pride. And at table 3, Richard Whitfield was standing too, his phone forgotten on the table before him. His face had lost its cold disdain, replaced by something Jasmine couldn't quite read. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant respect. As the applause continued, Jasmine rose from the bench and offered a small, dignified bow just as Ms. Rivera had taught her. In that moment, despite her borrowed dress and second-hand shoes, she felt like she truly belonged on that stage. The challenge had been issued and she had answered it, not with words, but with music that no one in that room, not even Richard Whitfield with all his millions, could dismiss. The applause seemed to go on forever. Jasmine stood on stage, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief, pride, and lingering nervousness. She hadn't expected this reaction. Not after the way Richard Whitfield had spoken about her. Not in a room filled with people who lived in a world so different from her own. As the clapping finally began to subside, the event host hurried onto the stage, her expression a blend of surprise and delight. Jasmine Mason. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, taking Jasmine's hand and raising it as if she'd won a boxing match. "This is exactly why we do what we do at Arts Forward. Talent like this deserves to be discovered and nurtured." Jasmine smiled shyly, overwhelmed by the attention. As she glanced across the ballroom, she noticed something had changed. The polite disinterest she'd seen earlier had been replaced by genuine curiosity. People were whispering to each other, but now they were leaning forward, pointing, asking questions. Even the event photographer, who had been half-heartedly snapping pictures during the earlier performances, was now capturing shot after shot. When she was finally allowed to leave the stage, her mother enveloped her in a tight hug. "Did you see their faces?" Denise whispered fiercely in her ear. "They never saw you coming." Ms. Rivera was next, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "In all my years of teaching, I've never been prouder," she said, squeezing Jasmine's shoulders. "You didn't just play the notes, you made them mean something." For the next 20 minutes, Jasmine stood backstage, still buzzing with adrenaline as the remaining performances took place. A modern dance group followed her, then a spoken word artist from another community program. Both were talented, but Jasmine noticed the audience's attention had shifted. People kept glancing toward the wings as if hoping she might return for an encore. "They've never reacted like this before," one of the event organizers murmured to Ms. Rivera, not realizing Jasmine could hear. "Usually they're just waiting for the performances to be over so they can network." As the formal program concluded, the host invited all the performers back on stage for a final round of applause. Standing in the line of artists, Jasmine felt a strange new confidence. She belonged here among them, not because someone had been charitable enough to include her, but because she had earned her place. "The performers will now join us for the reception," the host announced. "Please take this opportunity to speak with these talented individuals and learn more about our programs." The reception was held in an adjoining room, with waiters circulating trays of tiny food that looked too fancy to eat, and champagne flutes filled with sparkling cider for the underage performers. Jasmine stayed close to her mother, feeling suddenly shy again now that she would have to talk to these people instead of just playing for them. They had barely entered the reception when a small crowd began to form around them. Well-dressed strangers introduced themselves: the dean of a prestigious music school, the director of the City Symphony's youth program, the owner of a local recording studio. All of them wanted to know the same things. How long had she been playing? Who was her teacher? What were her plans for the future? "I just want to go to music school someday," Jasmine answered honestly when asked about her dreams. "But we're still figuring out how to make that happen." Her mother's hand tightened on her shoulder at these words. They'd never discussed the reality of paying for music school, not in detail. It was a far-off dream, something to work toward, but not something they allowed themselves to dwell on too much. Even with scholarships, the top conservatories would be financially out of reach. "Well, after what we heard tonight, I'd say you have options," said the dean, handing Denise his business card. "We should talk about our scholarship program. We're always looking for exceptional talent." As the night went on, more people approached them. A woman who ran a summer music camp offered Jasmine a full scholarship for the following year. A couple who supported young musicians wanted to discuss sponsoring private lessons with a renowned teacher who usually didn't accept students under 18. Through it all, Jasmine noticed Richard Whitfield watching from across the room. Unlike earlier, he wasn't checking his phone or chatting with business associates. He was simply observing, a thoughtful expression on his face as he swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Don't mind him," Ms. Rivera said, following Jasmine's gaze. "Some people have a hard time admitting when they're wrong." But Jasmine wasn't angry anymore. The music had washed away her hurt and indignation, leaving behind only a quiet determination. She'd proven herself the only way that mattered, through her art. As the crowd around them thinned, with many guests making their way to the exit, Jasmine noticed Whitfield finally moving in their direction. Her mother noticed too, straightening up and stepping slightly in front of Jasmine in a protective gesture that wasn't lost on Whitfield. He stopped a respectful distance away. Up close, he looked less intimidating than he had from the stage, older with lines around his eyes that spoke of years of stress and hard work. "Miss Mason," he said, addressing Jasmine directly. "I wonder if I might have a word." Denise's expression remained cool. "I think you've said quite enough already, Mr. Whitfield." He nodded, accepting the rebuke. "You're right, which is why I owe your daughter an apology." He turned his attention back to Jasmine. "I made assumptions that were unfair and, as you demonstrated quite thoroughly, completely wrong." Jasmine wasn't sure how to respond. She hadn't expected an apology, especially not a public one. "It's okay," she said finally, because it seemed like the simplest thing to say. "It isn't, actually," Whitfield replied, "but I appreciate your graciousness." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I've been in this business a long time, Miss Mason. I've seen a lot of talented people come and go. But what you did tonight, that was something special." Despite herself, Jasmine felt a glow of pride at his words. "If you don't mind," he continued, "I'd like to ask you a few questions, not about your background or your training. I think we've established that I made enough wrong assumptions there. I want to know about your relationship with music, what it means to you." It was such an unexpected request that Jasmine found herself nodding. Whitfield led them to a small seating area that had emptied out as the reception wound down. As they settled into the plush chairs, Jasmine noticed that he positioned himself so that she and her mother were seated together, with Ms. Rivera beside them while he sat across from them, not looming or imposing, but meeting them at eye level. "When did you first know that music was important to you?" he asked. It was a simple question, but one that made Jasmine think. "I was 8, she said slowly. "My school took us on a field trip to hear the Detroit Symphony. They played Dvořák's New World Symphony." She smiled at the memory. "I'd never heard anything like it before. It was like the music was telling a story without any words. I couldn't stop thinking about it for days afterward." Whitfield nodded, his expression softening. "And when did you start playing?" "Right after that," Denise answered. "She begged me for lessons. I couldn't afford them then, but there was a piano at the community center. She'd go there every chance she got, trying to teach herself." Ms. Rivera picked up the thread. "That's where I found her, playing by ear with no formal training, but with such natural musicality. It was remarkable." "And where do you practice now?" Whitfield asked. Jasmine and her mother exchanged glances. "We have an upright at home," Denise said carefully. "It's old, but it works. It's a Baldwin," Jasmine added. "From the 1980s, we found it on Craigslist. The G key sticks sometimes, and it needs tuning more often than it should. But I love it." Whitfield listened intently, occasionally asking another question about Jasmine's musical influences, her practice routine, the pieces she found most challenging. Unlike his dismissive attitude earlier, he now seemed genuinely interested in her answers. "You know," he said finally, "I started with nothing too. Not many people know that about me. My father was a factory worker. My mother cleaned houses. The first computer I ever owned was one I built myself from parts I scrounged from the junkyard." Jasmine hadn't expected this revelation. The Richard Whitfield she'd read about in news articles seemed to have sprung into existence fully formed, with his expensive suits and tech empire. "So what changed?" she asked. "Someone took a chance on me," he said simply. "I had an idea, a good one, but no connections, no fancy degree, no startup capital. Just determination and the certainty that I could make it work if given the opportunity." He smiled slightly. "Sound familiar?" Before Jasmine could respond, one of the event organizers approached their group. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're closing up the reception area soon," she said. Whitfield nodded. "Of course." He turned back to Jasmine and her mother. "I've taken enough of your time, but I'd like to continue this conversation if you're open to it." He pulled out a business card, simple white cardstock with just his name and contact information, and handed it to Denise. "My foundation does more than just write checks, Miss Mason. We invest in potential, and you have that in abundance." As they stood to leave, Whitfield extended his hand first to Denise, then to Ms. Rivera, and finally to Jasmine. "Thank you for proving me wrong tonight," he said as they shook hands. "It doesn't happen often, but when it does, I try to pay attention." Walking out of the Grand Meridian into the cool night air, Jasmine felt as if she were waking from a dream. The evening had begun with humiliation and nearly ended in triumph, only to take this unexpected turn at the last moment. "What do you think he meant about continuing the conversation?" she asked her mother as they waited for the bus. Denise looked down at the business card in her hand, then tucked it carefully into her purse. "I don't know, honey. But whatever it is, you earned it tonight. Not because of where you come from or what you look like, but because of your talent and your heart." She put her arm around Jasmine's shoulders, and that's something no one can ever take away from you. As the city bus approached, its headlights cutting through the darkness, Jasmine leaned into her mother's embrace. Whatever happened next, whether Richard Whitfield's interest led to anything concrete or not, she had proven something important tonight. Not just to the wealthy audience at the Grand Meridian, but to herself. She belonged in that world of music. Not as a visitor or a charity case, but as an artist in her own right. And that knowledge, more than any applause or recognition, was what she would carry with her from this night forward. 3 days had passed since the fundraiser at the Grand Meridian, but for Jasmine, life had already changed in ways she couldn't have imagined. The local newspaper had run a story about her performance, complete with a photo of her at the piano. Her classmates, who had never paid much attention to her musical pursuits before, now looked at her differently in the school hallways. "Is it true you made a millionaire cry?" her friend Tasha asked during lunch period, sliding onto the bench beside her. Jasmine shook her head, laughing. "No, he didn't cry. He just changed his mind about me, I guess." The truth was, she wasn't entirely sure what had happened with Richard Whitfield. The business card he'd given her mother remained on their kitchen counter untouched. Denise had been cautious, warning Jasmine not to get her hopes up. "Rich people make promises all the time," she'd said that night as they rode the bus home. "It makes them feel good about themselves. Doesn't mean they follow through." But Ms. Rivera had been more optimistic. "Richard Whitfield is many things," she'd told Jasmine during their lesson the next day. "But he's not known for empty gestures. If he gave you his card, he meant something by it." Still, neither Jasmine nor her mother had made the call. Pride, caution, uncertainty. Whatever the reason, they had gone back to their normal routine. Denise worked her 2 jobs. Jasmine went to school and practiced piano, and life continued much as it had before. Until Thursday afternoon, when the call came. Jasmine was practicing a new piece, a Rachmaninoff prelude that Ms. Rivera had challenged her with when the phone rang. Her mother was at work, so Jasmine paused her playing to answer it. "Hello, Mason residence." "Hello, this is Catherine Lynn, Mr. Whitfield's assistant," came a crisp, professional voice. "I'm calling for Jasmine or Denise Mason." Jasmine's hand tightened on the receiver. "This is Jasmine." "Wonderful. Mr. Whitfield was hoping to schedule a meeting with you and your mother at your convenience. He has a proposition he'd like to discuss regarding your musical education." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. "A proposition?" "Yes, he prefers to discuss the details in person." "Would you and your mother be available this Saturday morning? Mr. Whitfield could meet you at the Detroit Institute of Arts Cafe at 10 a.m. He thought a public venue might be more comfortable for an initial discussion." Jasmine hesitated. Her mother had the morning shift on Saturday, and she'd never agreed to Jasmine meeting Whitfield alone. "My mom works Saturday mornings," she explained. "Could we do Saturday afternoon instead? Maybe around 2? Let me check." There was a brief pause and the sound of typing. "That would work. Mr. Whitfield can meet you at 2 p.m. Would that be suitable?" "I think so, but I need to confirm with my mom first." "Of course. You can reach me at this number to confirm or reschedule." Catherine recited a phone number, which Jasmine quickly jotted down on the notepad they kept by the phone. "Mr. Whitfield is looking forward to continuing your conversation." After hanging up, Jasmine stared at the notepad for a long moment. What kind of proposition was Whitfield talking about? And why did he want to meet at an art museum instead of his office? When Denise came home that evening, exhausted from her hospital shift, Jasmine waited until she'd had a chance to eat dinner before mentioning the call. "His assistant said he has a proposition about my musical education," Jasmine explained as they washed dishes together. She didn't give any details. Denise dried a plate thoughtfully. "The DIA is a public place at least. And it's free for Detroit residents." She glanced at her daughter. "Do you want to go?" Jasmine nodded. "I'm curious, and Ms. Rivera thinks he's serious." "Okay," Denise said finally. "We'll go. But we're not agreeing to anything on the spot. no matter what he offers. We'll hear him out, say we need to think about it, and then we'll discuss it together. Deal? Deal, Jasmine agreed. Saturday afternoon arrived clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day. Jasmine and Denise dressed carefully, not formally, but neatly, and took the bus downtown to the Detroit Institute of Arts. The museum's grand white marble facade gleamed in the sunlight as they climbed the steps to the entrance. Inside, the cafe was located near the Rivera Court, where Diego Rivera's famous Detroit industry murals covered the walls. After showing their Detroit resident ID cards for free admission, they made their way to the cafe, arriving a few minutes before 2 p.m. To their surprise, Whitfield was already there, sitting alone at a corner table with 2 folders in front of him. He was dressed more casually than at the fundraiser, in a sweater and slacks rather than a suit. Though Jasmine suspected even his casual clothes cost more than her mother's entire wardrobe. He stood as they approached, extending his hand first to Denise. "Mrs. Mason, thank you for coming. And Jasmine, it's good to see you again." "Ms. Mason," Denise corrected him with a polite but firm smile as they shook hands. "I'm not married, Ms. Mason," Whitfield repeated with a nod of acknowledgement. "Please have a seat. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea?" Once they were all settled with drinks, coffee for the adults, hot chocolate for Jasmine, Whitfield opened one of the folders. "I've been thinking a lot about your performance on Friday night," he began, addressing Jasmine. "Not just the technical skill, which was impressive, but the artistry behind it. You play with a depth of emotion that can't be taught." "Thank you," Jasmine said, feeling both proud and slightly embarrassed by his praise. "After we spoke, I did some research," Whitfield continued, "about young pianists and the path to a career in classical music." He turned to Denise. "It's incredibly competitive, as I'm sure you know. The most promising students typically attend specialized music schools, have access to top-tier instruments, receive private instruction from renowned teachers, participate in international competitions." Denise's expression remained neutral, but Jasmine could see the tension in her shoulders. These were all things they knew they couldn't afford, barriers that stood between Jasmine and her dreams. "The cost is prohibitive for most families," Whitfield acknowledged. "Even with scholarships, the expenses add up quickly. Competition fees, travel costs, appropriate concert attire, not to mention the opportunity cost if a young musician needs to practice rather than work part-time jobs." "We're managing fine," Denise said, her voice carrying a hint of defensiveness. Whitfield nodded respectfully. "I'm sure you are. Your daughter's talent proves that. But I'd like to remove some of those barriers if you'll allow it." He opened the second folder and slid it across the table. Inside was a formal letter with the Whitfield Foundation letterhead. "This is a proposal for an educational grant," he explained as Denise picked up the letter. "Full tuition to the preparatory program at the Detroit Conservatory, weekly private lessons with Dr. Eleanor Chen, she's the head of piano studies at the University of Michigan, a monthly maintenance stipend for your home piano, and entry fees for 3 major competitions per year, including travel expenses for both of you." Jasmine felt like she couldn't breathe. These were opportunities beyond anything she'd dared to hope for. "And what do you want in return?" Denise asked, cutting straight to the point. It was a fair question. No one gave away something for nothing, especially not someone like Richard Whitfield, who had made his fortune through shrewd business deals. "2 things," Whitfield said. "First, I want Jasmine to perform at foundation events when her schedule permits, no more than 6 times per year, and never during exam periods or competition preparation." Denise nodded slowly. "And second, I want to document her journey, not in an invasive way," he added quickly, seeing Denise's expression harden, "but through a series of interviews and recorded performances over time. My foundation is working to change the narrative around who belongs in classical music. Jasmine's story, her talent, her determination, could inspire other young musicians from similar backgrounds." "You want to use my daughter as a success story for your charity work," Denise said bluntly. Whitfield didn't flinch from the accusation. "In part, yes. It would benefit the foundation. But it would also create a record of Jasmine's development as an artist, which could be valuable for her future career." He leaned forward. "Ms. Mason, I won't pretend this is entirely altruistic. The foundation benefits from supporting exceptional talent. But that doesn't change the fact that Jasmine deserves these opportunities, based solely on her ability. Denise was silent for a long moment, reading through the details of the proposal. Jasmine held her breath, afraid to say anything that might influence her mother's decision. It says here the grant covers through high school graduation, Denise noted. What happens after that? If Jasmine maintains her current trajectory, we would discuss college options, Whitfield replied. The foundation has relationships with several conservatories, but that would be a separate conversation when the time comes. No strings attached to this current offer. And if she decides music isn't what she wants to pursue? Whitfield looked surprised by the question but recovered quickly. The grant is for musical education specifically, but if Jasmine's interests change, we wouldn't demand repayment or anything like that. Though I must say, based on what I've seen, it would be a significant loss to the musical world. Denise nodded, considering this. We'll need time to think about it, and I'd want a lawyer to look over any paperwork before we sign anything. Of course, Whitfield agreed immediately. Take all the time you need, and I'd be happy to cover the cost of having your own attorney review the documents. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, different from the one he'd given them at the fundraiser. This is a local attorney who specializes in arts education contracts. She's independent, not connected to my foundation. She could review everything from your perspective. As they continued discussing the practical details of the proposal, Jasmine's mind raced with possibilities. Studying at the Detroit Conservatory, lessons with Dr. Chen, whose recordings she'd listened to online but never imagined meeting in person. Proper maintenance for their piano, competitions where she could test her skills against other serious young musicians, but there was still one question that nagged at her. Mr. Whitfield, she said, speaking up for the first time since the conversation had turned to the grant details. Why are you doing this, really? The adults fell silent, both turning to look at her. I mean, she continued, gathering her courage. At the fundraiser, you didn't think I was worth listening to. What changed? Whitfield seemed taken aback by her directness. He set down his coffee cup and considered her question for a moment before answering. You challenged my assumptions, he said finally, not with arguments or defiance, but with excellence. That's rare in my experience, he smiled slightly. I've built my career on recognizing potential, in technologies, in business ideas, in people. I missed it with you at first. I don't like being wrong, but when I am, I try to correct my mistake. It wasn't exactly an apology, but Jasmine sensed it was as close as someone like Richard Whitfield came to admitting error. As they left the museum an hour later, grant proposal tucked safely in Denise's bag, Jasmine felt as if she were walking on air. Nothing was certain yet. Her mother still wanted time to consider the offer and consult with the attorney. But for the first time, the future she'd dreamed of seemed within reach. What do you think? She asked as they waited at the bus stop. Denise put an arm around her shoulders. I think you did this, Jasmine. Not by asking for handouts or making excuses, but by being so good they couldn't ignore you. She kissed the top of Jasmine's head. I'm so proud of you, baby. Whatever we decide about Whitfield's offer, nobody can take that away from you. Jasmine leaned into her mother's embrace, watching the autumn leaves dance across the museum steps. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. She would keep playing, keep practicing, keep pouring her heart into her music. The path ahead might have fewer obstacles now, but it would still require all of her dedication and passion, and she was ready for it. 3 years had passed since that autumn day at the Detroit Institute of Arts. 3 years of intense practice, new challenges, and remarkable growth. The calendar on the kitchen wall of the Masons' new apartment, still modest but in a safer neighborhood with reliable heating, showed a circled date. June 15th. The Detroit Symphony Orchestra's Young Artist Showcase Jasmine, now 17, sat at her piano. Not the old Baldwin with the sticky G key, but a carefully refurbished Yamaha upright that Richard Whitfield's foundation had provided during her first year as a grant recipient. Her fingers moved confidently through the complex passages of Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire. The doorbell rang, interrupting her practice. Jasmine glanced at the clock. 10:30 a.m., right on time. I'll get it, called Denise from the living room. Though she no longer worked 2 jobs, the stipend from Whitfield's foundation had allowed her to cut back to just her hospital position. She still kept busy, recently starting online courses toward a nursing degree. Jasmine heard the door open and the familiar voice of Ms. Rivera. Though Jasmine now studied primarily with Dr. Chen at the conservatory, she still met with Ms. Rivera once a month. Some relationships were too important to leave behind. "She's been at that piano since 6 this morning," Denise told Ms. Rivera as they entered the practice room, which had once been a second bedroom. "I had to make her stop for breakfast," Jasmine smiled sheepishly. "The showcase is in 3 days, and you'll be brilliant," Ms. Rivera assured her, setting down her bag. "But not if you work yourself into exhaustion before you even get on stage." It was an old conversation, repeated often over the past 3 years. Jasmine's determination, her drive to prove herself worthy of the opportunities she'd received, sometimes pushed her too hard. Finding balance had been an ongoing challenge. I know, Jasmine agreed, stretching her fingers. "But this isn't just any performance. Indeed, it wasn't." The DSO Young Artist Showcase was attended by representatives from major conservatories across the country, including Juilliard, Curtis, and Eastman. For a young pianist hoping to continue her studies at the highest level, it was a crucial platform. "The list is sounding beautiful," Ms. Rivera observed, changing the subject. "How's the Schubert coming along?" "Still working on the third movement," Jasmine admitted. "Dr. Chen thinks I'm rushing it." "You are," Ms. Rivera agreed with a knowing smile. "You always do when you're nervous. Remember what we talked about. It's not a race to the finish line. Every note deserves its moment." As they discussed technical aspects of the performance, Denise excused herself to make coffee. Moments like these, watching her daughter deepen conversation about musical interpretation, confidently holding her own with experienced teachers, still sometimes struck her as surreal. The journey hadn't been smooth. There had been moments of doubt, especially in the beginning. The attorney they'd consulted had confirmed that Whitfield's offer was legitimate and fair. But Denise had still worried about strings that might not be visible in the contract. "People like that always want something," she'd told Jasmine after their meeting at the museum. "I just can't figure out what he really wants from you." But over time, Richard Whitfield had proven himself to be, if not entirely selfless, at least true to his word. The grant had come with the promised performances at foundation events, and Jasmine's progress had been documented through professionally recorded performances and occasional interviews. But Whitfield had never tried to control her musical choices or take credit for her accomplishments. In fact, he'd become something of a distant mentor, attending her major performances and occasionally offering advice about navigating the classical music world, always careful to defer to her teachers on matters of technique or interpretation. He connected her with industry professionals but never forced relationships, introduced her to potential opportunities but respected when she or Denise declined them. The doorbell rang again, pulling Jasmine from her concentration. "I'll get it," Denise called from the kitchen. A moment later, she appeared in the doorway of the practice room, an envelope in her hand and an unreadable expression on her face. "Courier delivery. It's from Whitfield." Jasmine took the envelope, her pulse quickening. She hadn't expected to hear from him today. He was traveling on business according to his last email. Not due back until just before the showcase. Inside the envelope was a short note and a USB drive. "What is it?" Ms. Rivera asked, curiosity evident in her voice. "I'm not sure," Jasmine replied, reading the note. "He says it's something I should see before the showcase, something that might help put things in perspective." They moved to the living room, where Denise's laptop sat on the coffee table. Jasmine inserted the USB drive and a single video file appeared. She clicked on it and the screen filled with Richard Whitfield's face, recorded in what appeared to be a hotel room. "Jasmine," he began, "I'm sorry I can't deliver this message in person. I know you're preparing for the showcase and I don't want to disrupt your practice schedule. But I wanted to share something with you before your performance." He shifted slightly, and the camera angle widened to reveal a piano keyboard beside him. 3 years ago, you asked me why I decided to support your education after initially dismissing you. I gave you an answer about recognizing potential, which was true but incomplete." Whitfield's normally confident demeanor seemed slightly uncomfortable, more vulnerable than Jasmine had ever seen him. "The truth is, your performance that night reminded me of something I'd forgotten, something important. He positioned his hands over the piano keys. Before I became a tech entrepreneur, before business school, before any of that, I was a pianist. To Jasmine's astonishment, Whitfield began to play. Not with her level of skill, but with obvious training and genuine feeling. She recognized the piece immediately. Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, the very piece she had played at the fundraiser 3 years ago. From ages 8 to 18, music was my life. Whitfield's voice continued over his playing. I was good, not exceptional like you, but good enough to dream of a career. But my father had different ideas. He'd worked in factories his whole life and wanted more for me. Practical careers, he called them. Business, engineering, law. Whitfield's hands faltered slightly on a difficult passage, but he pushed through. I let myself be convinced. Told myself I was being realistic. Traded my passion for practicality. It was the right choice financially. I've been very successful by those measures. But watching you play that night with such conviction and courage, even after hearing my thoughtless comments. He shook his head, hands still moving across the keys. It made me realize how much I'd given up, how empty certain kinds of success can be. The piece came to an end and Whitfield turned back to the camera. I didn't offer you the grant because I felt guilty, though I did, or because it was good publicity for the foundation, though it has been. I did it because I saw in you the road not taken in my own life, the courage I didn't have at your age. He smiled, a genuine expression without his usual reserve. In 3 days, you'll play for people who can open doors to world-class training and eventually, a professional career. You'll be nervous. You might wonder if you belong on that stage, with competitors from more privileged backgrounds or with longer pedigrees. His expression grew serious. You do belong there, Jasmine. Not because of my foundation or Dr. Chen or anyone else who's helped along the way. You belong there because of your extraordinary talent and your unwavering dedication. The rest of us just cleared away some of the unfair obstacles that stood in your path. The video ended with Whitfield wishing her luck and promising to be in the audience for her performance. As the screen went dark, Jasmine realized her cheeks were wet with tears. Well, said Ms. Rivera after a long silence, that explains a few things. Denise sat beside Jasmine on the couch, putting an arm around her shoulders. You okay, honey? Jasmine nodded, unable to find words for the complicated emotions swirling inside her. Relief, understanding, gratitude, and a renewed sense of responsibility, not to Whitfield or his foundation, but to her own gift. The next 3 days passed in a blur of final preparations. Jasmine practiced with renewed focus, no longer driven by anxiety about proving herself worthy, but by the pure desire to share her music as authentically as possible. On the evening of the showcase, the grand hall of Orchestra Place gleamed with polished wood and brass. The stage was set with a magnificent Steinway concert grand, its lid propped fully open to fill the space with sound. Behind the curtain, Jasmine waited with the other young performers, violinists, cellists, and fellow pianists, all exceptional, all nervously preparing in their own ways. Dr. Chen made last-minute adjustments to Jasmine's performance attire, a simple but elegant black dress, professional without being pretentious. Remember, the piano is just a tool, she reminded Jasmine as she had countless times before. You are the instrument. The music comes from within you. From her position backstage, Jasmine could see glimpses of the audience through the curtain gap. The hall was filled with conservatory representatives, music critics, patrons of the arts, and proud family members. In the third row, she spotted Richard Whitfield, sitting beside Ms. Rivera. Several rows back, Denise sat with 2 of Jasmine's friends from school who had come to support her. The showcase began with a young violinist, followed by a cellist. Then it was Jasmine's turn. As she walked onto the stage, the polished floor gleaming beneath the spotlights, she felt a strange calm settle over her. This moment, her hands on these keys, her heart in this music, was what everything had been leading toward. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. The audience faded away. The pressure of the moment receded. There was only Jasmine and the piano and the music waiting to be brought to life. Her fingers touched the keys, and the first notes of Schubert's Impromptu in G-flat major filled the hall, delicate, thoughtful, unhurried. Each phrase flowed naturally into the next, telling a story without words. As she played, Jasmine thought about the journey that had brought her here, the community center piano where she'd first discovered her love of music. The old Baldwin with its sticky G key, the cruel words that had nearly silenced her at the fundraiser, the unexpected opportunity that had followed, the countless hours of practice, the setbacks and breakthroughs, the moments of doubt and triumph. But mostly she thought about what Whitfield had said in his video, about courage and authenticity and remaining true to your passion in a world that often values other things. When she transitioned from the Schubert to Liszt's La Campanella, her fingers flew across the keys with both precision and abandon. The technically demanding piece, with its rapid repeating notes and wide leaps, showcased her remarkable dexterity. But it was the emotional depth she brought to the performance, the joy and wonder and sheer love of music evident in every measure that held the audience spellbound. As the final notes resonated through the hall, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the audience erupted in applause. Jasmine stood and bowed, her heart full. In that moment of triumph, she wasn't thinking about scholarships or future careers or what doors might open because of this performance. She was simply grateful for the gift of music, for the people who had believed in her, and for the courage to pursue her passion against all odds. As she looked out at the audience, at her mother's tear-streaked face, at Ms. Rivera's proud smile, at Whitfield's knowing nod, she realized that her journey was just beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more barriers to break, more music to master. But in this moment, on this stage, with the sound of applause washing over her, Jasmine Mason knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged.